shame, guilt, distrust, control, paranoia. Do any of these words sound familiar to you? Well, it does for me, because these are all aspects of our ego that come out to play. For some people, from time to time. For others, for the majority of time. But why? And what is the ego? Well, it's funny when I think back when I was younger and I used to look at people that I thought were egotistical. I thought that they were superior or felt better than others. Over time though, I realized that it's actually quite the opposite. But first let's establish, what is ego? What is our ego self? The ego, which is this cute little part of us, all right? We all have it. It's a part of us that got conditioned, all right? It's the part that experienced the traumas and created stories around those traumas. It's the part in us that created all the negative beliefs. It's basically our shadow self, right? You could call it the lower self if you want. What is the reason that our ego gets created to begin with? We start developing the ego as children when we need to create safety in our identity and image of who we think we need to be in this world. We have to establish a sense of self in order to make sense of what is happening in the world around us. And our egos are highly shaped by our personal experiences, right? If you had an experience as a child where perhaps you were vulnerable, right? You were just yourself, and maybe you got shut down or blamed or made to feel small or shamed, that's when the ego comes out and it says, wait, I'm not good enough as I am. I need to change something. I need to protect myself, right? And that's where we go and we create this image and we start putting up walls or, sort of self-protect in order to feel safe in our surroundings. But what we don't realize is that this is coming along with us into adulthood unless we look at it. Now, we bump into a lot of issues if we are constantly operating out of this ego self, out of our shadow self. Number one, it's really difficult to establish authentic relationships and connections with other people because it's hard to be vulnerable when we are coming from our self-protection mode. Number two, it's actually also challenging to grow and heal when we're operating from ego, because when we are in our ego self, when we are in our lower self, we believe that if we face our shadow, if we really take a look at how we're operating, that it will reveal to us something bad about ourselves. And it would just bring up more shame. So we just deny it and we don't want to look, and that keeps us in that self-protected mode. It becomes this perpetuating cycle of shame, because if we fear looking at what's going on underneath the surface, then we feel shame for seeing the shame, and then it's impossible to heal that way. Number three, it truly robs you of peace of mind and satisfaction in this life, because it makes you feel like you are never good enough. It's like you're chasing the next thing, whether it's material or even spiritual. A lot of people are constantly chasing this spiritual high because they don't feel good enough as they are. And that is ego once again, because it has you under the illusion that if you finally achieve this thing, whether it's spiritual or material, that you will finally be a good person, or you will finally feel good enough. And that is just a myth. All right, before we dive deeper into this topic, and trust me, it gets a lot more interesting, please like and subscribe to help me heal my inner child. Just kidding. For real, it will help the algorithm, so it would mean so much for me if you like it and subscribe so we could help more people. Guess what? Keeping yourself small is actually an ego response. Why? Because when you are keeping yourself small, you're actually tapped into doubt, fear, judgment. Think about it. All of those things are aspects of the ego. These are all shadows that were created by the lower self. So don't think that by keeping yourself small that you're coming from a higher place, because fear, judgment, none of that is true or high for that matter. There's a misconception that people have when they think that when people believe in themselves, that is ego. That is highly misunderstood. The people that you think have an overinflated sense of self or ego, they may be the most traumatized and hurt people. And because of that, they needed to create an even bigger ego to feel safe in this world. Here's the irony though. Ready for it? Your real self, your soul self, your true self does not need any doubt, any judgment, any fear, because it knows itself and its truth. The truth of your soul is that it's worthy, it's whole. It never had an issue to begin with. But when you can't see that truth in your own self because it's covered up with shame, which once again is ego, you start thinking that you need to create this larger than life image or persona and start covering up with bologna macaroni. Why? Because you and your lower self forgot who you are in your true self, right? That you were good enough, whole enough, perfect enough as you are. How amazing is this? And I also want to share with you like how this shows up in my work as a consultant and a coach. I see this all the time, and I could smell it miles away when an employee feels not good enough, and how many issues that brings up in the workplace. But before going there and before I forget, I just want you to know that in the Flying Higher Academy, I'm gonna put a link down below. We talk about ego versus soul in the greatest detail. I show you how to recognize when you're operating out of ego. And for the fun of it, I'm gonna reveal one of them to you right now. If you are always rushing, like rushing, I don't have to tell you how that looks like. That is actually an ego response. Why? Because rushing signifies lack. And you could continue going down that trail. Lack, impatience, insecure, not enough, right? Lack is not enough. Not enough is a shadow. It's an ego aspect. There's always enough, there's full of abundance, and when you don't believe in that and when you don't operate from that, you never feel like you're doing enough, giving enough, creating enough, and that is definitely an ego response. So how does this show up with employees or even owners and managers at work? I do business consulting as well, for those of you who don't know. So if you're watching this, I hope you don't take anything personally. If we've ever worked together, I love you. I just want to explain how this shows up with people at work. So when someone is operating out of ego, out of their conditioned self, what happens is when we need to create any type of change, streamline a process, or do anything to help and improve the business, these people make it about themselves. It's like you're having a conversation and you're trying to talk about, the simple process. Hey, let's iron this out. Let's make it work. We got to scale. Here's what needs to happen. And what's going to happen is that their insecurities are going to come out, or their shadow self is going to come out of not feeling maybe relevant enough or good enough, or whatever the reason is. And there's no judgment from my part. I simply want to explain how this comes through. It derails the entire process, because when it becomes personal, they will act out in so many ways that basically poops on the entire process. And We see this each and every time. There's always one or two people that are going to make everything about themselves. And it's really sad to watch, because sometimes if you want to give a genuine compliment to such a person, they have a hard time accepting it, and they will think you have ulterior motives or something like that. And it's a pity, because when people feel good about themselves, everybody wins. It just makes life easier for the person, for everybody around them. And this is something that we all need to work on. I know that I have to, literally on a daily basis, because the ego, it's not like we could get rid of it. It's not like you even want to get rid of it, right? It's just a part of us that when it gets activated, we're in a different mode. We're in an illusion. We're in trauma. We are in our shadow self, and we don't see or remember the truth. And the truth, my dear, my loves, is love. Love, acceptance, no judgment heals it all. Because imagine if you have no judgment, if you're accepting of what is, then you're not afraid to look under the hood, right? You're not afraid to look at your shadows. You're not afraid to discover anything, because whatever you think you're going to discover is not going to make you feel bad about you, because your soul self cannot be touched, cannot be harmed, cannot be tainted. It's just your experiences, your trauma, your conditioning, the beliefs that you picked up throughout your lifetime that is making you think that you aren't enough. So I hope that this video helped you step into your power, remove and shed all the layers, which I feel like doing right now, and to remember your worth, remember that you are gold, and to remember that by keeping small, you are actually in your ego. And one more thing before we wrap this up. The opposite is not trying to make yourself feel better by telling yourself you're better than anyone else. That is not a healthy ego. The healthy ego is just knowing that you are. There's nothing to add. There's nothing to subtract. The moment you're putting yourself or anyone else on a pedestal, it's ego. If you're putting yourself or anyone else down, that's also ego. Just see the truth. And the truth is, without the trauma, the truth is without the negative beliefs, the truth is without the experiences and meaning and stories that you have created and accumulated. You are unique and special in your own way without needing to make yourself better or less than anyone else, because that comes from insecurity. So anytime you're in doubt, simply ask yourself, are you coming from love or are you coming from fear and insecurity? And that will reveal to you if you're coming from your ego or you're coming from your soul. And don't judge it either way, okay? I love you guys so much. Please share this video if you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, I am here to support you on your journey. Make it a great one.